Hello everyone, and welcome to our Fertility Network UK webinar this evening, which is for PCOS Awareness Month. I'm Kate from Fertility Network UK, and with me this evening, we're really lucky. We've got Rohini Bajekal, who is going to be discussing nutrition and lifestyle for PCOS, Polycystic Ovary Syndrome. Rohini is a nutritionist, and she co-authored the book Living PCOS Free: How to Regain Your Hormonal Health with Polycystic Ovary Syndrome, with her mother, who is a gynecologist. Rohini also has personal experience of PCOS, which I think is really helpful when we're talking about things like this. And all of the nutrition and lifestyle advice which she gives is all evidence-based. We just need to have a little bit of housekeeping, first of all. We've got some questions in advance and we'll go through those first, but if you want to ask a question, just put it in the Q&A box. If you want to make sure that no one else sees your question, you just address it to hosts and panelists only, and then no one else can see that you've asked a question. With any names, we obviously wouldn't read out your name anyway, so any questions you ask will be completely anonymous. We do record these webinars and it will be on the website, on the webinars page within the next few days. So if you want to check anything or go back to anything, you can find it there in a few days' time. Finally, I just wanted to say that everything we offer as a charity is completely free, but we are a small charity and we rely on donations. So if you do feel able to make a small donation to help us put these webinars on, we'd be incredibly grateful. You can do it very simply by texting to donate. And if you wanted to make a one-off donation of £5, you can text FNUK5 to 70085, and that's for a one-off donation of £5. If you're feeling very generous today and you want to donate more, you could donate £10 by texting FNUK10 to 70085. The key thing to remember is just that the number is 70085, and then you text FNUK and however much you'd like to donate. Thank you in advance for anyone who does feel able to do this. We really appreciate it and we are very grateful. But now let's get on with the webinar and let's start talking to Rohini. The first question I had for you, which is the most basic one of all, is what actually is PCOS?
Well, that's a great question. So I first want to thank you, Kate, for organising, coordinating this webinar and for all your efforts, and for Fertility Network UK for everything that you do. PCOS is the most common cause of infertility in the UK and globally, so it's such an important issue. But before we start talking about PCOS, as you said, what exactly is it? So PCOS, or as it's abbreviated often to PCOS or PCOD in some parts of the world, it stands for Polycystic Ovary Syndrome. And polycystic ovary syndrome isn't often actually the best term for it, because polycystic ovaries are almost the least important of all the symptoms or the criteria for PCOS. And it's a complex endocrine condition. So just think of it as a complex hormonal condition, and sort of like the cousin of type 2 diabetes, where insulin resistance is the main driver for a lot of the symptoms you see in PCOS. And it's present in most people with PCOS as well. And so it has a wide range of reproductive, metabolic, and other symptoms associated with the condition, and it affects up to 10% or even more in some cases, depending on what groups you look at, of women in the reproductive age in the UK as well as globally, 75% of which are undiagnosed.
So what are the signs? I mean, how would someone know necessarily that they had PCOS themselves?
So that's a great question. So in terms of the signs, not everyone will have symptoms, but most people will have some of the common symptoms. And in the book that I wrote with my mother, so this is Living PCOS Free, we talk about some of the lesser known symptoms as well, because that's really important. And that's the reason that it's complex and there's a whole range of symptoms, is the reason why for many people the dots are never joined. You're going to see a dermatologist for your acne, you're going to see a dietitian for weight management, you're going to see an endocrinologist for your insulin resistance, but no one is connecting the dots to say this is PCOS. So what are the common symptoms? Now, to be diagnosed, you need to have 2 out of 3 of the Rotterdam criteria. And the first criteria is absent or irregular periods. And that's one of the most common symptoms of PCOS. It's the reason why it can be difficult to try to conceive as well if you're not ovulating regularly. So many people with PCOS will have had absent periods, or maybe they're only having 3 or 4 bleeds a year. Some people might be having longer cycles, but maybe still having more regular bleeds. And then other symptoms are all associated with androgen excess. So the most well-known androgen is testosterone. So these will be things like excess facial or body hair growth, maybe in places you wouldn't want it. Things like acne, so cystic acne on the jawline and chin, and that's very persistent. It continues into your adult years. Scalp hair loss, so that's another really distressing symptom. And then weight gain. We know that 8 out of 10 women with PCOS are living in larger bodies, so it can be harder to lose weight, but also easier to gain it as well. And then another common symptom is the insulin resistance. So you might be told that you've got pre-diabetes or even developing type 2 diabetes at a younger age. And then, as you mentioned, if you've got absent or irregular periods, that's the first sort of warning sign that go and look into this, go and get help. Because especially if you are trying to conceive, it will be much more difficult for you. And so trying to get your periods to be more regular will really help. And then when it comes to lesser known symptoms, these are the ones that are hardly ever talked about, but are really distressing in PCOS. So things like disordered eating, higher risk of things like binge eating disorder. Sleeping problems. There's something called sleep apnea, where your breathing stops and starts when you're sleeping. Even snoring is more common. Things like higher risk of psychological issues, which is something my mum and I talk about a lot in the book. So things like anxiety, depression, higher risk of OCD. If you have PCOS, you're also 6 times more likely to take your own life. So this is serious mental health issues that are associated with the condition. And these are just some of them, but then also the higher risk of long-term complications of things like womb cancer, type 2 diabetes, possibly cardiovascular disease, so heart disease. So yeah, I mean, there are so many different symptoms that we just don't talk about enough, and that quite often aren't even recognized as being associated with PCOS. And if you're listening to this thinking a lot of this like resonates with me, or I have some of these things, I have anxiety, you're not alone. A lot of people with PCOS really struggle with these symptoms.
So how do people normally get diagnosed? I mean, what's the normal pattern for someone finding out they've actually got PCOS?
Yeah, that's such an important question, Kate, because I think it's so important to know our own bodies and actually pay attention to any of these signs that things might be not quite right. When it comes to getting a diagnosis, taking that information to your healthcare professional, to your GP, and showing them maybe how you've tracked your cycle and what it looks like can be a really helpful way. But there is actually something that's official called the Rotterdam criteria that was established in 2003, so almost 20 years ago, by a group of international experts who met in Rotterdam, and they developed a criteria for adult diagnosis of PCOS. So you've got to have 2 out of 3 of the following criteria. The first one is absent or irregular periods. So that's something we already talked about. That's one of the hallmarks of PCOS, although not everyone with PCOS necessarily has to have irregular periods. I just want to say it's a syndrome. So there's a constellation of symptoms. Every single person is going to be different here. The second criteria is clinical or biochemical symptoms of androgen excess. So in simple terms, that's the visible signs of androgen excess. So things like acne, hair loss, scalp hair loss, excess body weight, things like excess facial hair or body hair growth, those are all clinical signs. And it can also show up on a blood test. So things like your testosterone may be higher on a blood test if you've got PCOS, and your LH-FSH ratio is also altered as well. And you'll have lower levels of SHBG. So this is stuff that your doctor will hopefully... I think there's a fox having a fight outside. I hope that didn't get picked up. This is what happens when you live in London. So yeah, the clinical and biochemical signs, these are 2 that you can have either or. And then the third criteria is the polycystic ovaries, which we all hear so much about. So these are not true cysts on your ovaries, and it's So important to emphasize that, because sometimes ovarian cysts get confused with polycystic ovaries. These are actually immature egg follicles that are on your ovaries, so they never really quite reach maturation. And what it looks like on an ultrasound is actually like a pearl necklace, which sounds a lot more glamorous, but it's like a string of pearls on the ovaries. And the reason that, you know, this criteria is different in adolescence is, so if you're a teenager and you've got PCOS, is because it's quite common to have polycystic ovaries in your teenage years. And so if you've got PCOS and you're a teenager, you need to have the top two criteria, so the absent or irregular periods, or the signs of androgen excess. So you've got to have 2 out of 3. In my case, I had all 3. So it was, you know, a sure thing. But I think knowing this can be really helpful, because you can ask your doctor to screen you. You can say, look, this is what my period's like, or could we do these blood tests? It's really important to mention that to get those blood tests done, you do have to be off the pill and off hormonal birth control, so that you can have your levels properly measured, and ideally 2 or 3 months after coming off the pill. So that's just important to say. But if you had irregular periods and then you went off the pill and you had these other signs of androgen excess, you could still technically be diagnosed as well. So yeah, just having as much information as possible is always helpful when you go and speak to a doctor.
So is it possible for someone to have mild PCOS? I mean, is there such a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I spend a lot of time as a nutritionist and lifestyle medicine professional myself. I spend a lot of time on my Instagram page educating people about PCOS and sharing things about it. But I often see misinformation as well online. There's often there's a lot of focus on the types of PCOS you might have. So there's this focus on things like post-pill PCOS or inflammatory PCOS. And that was actually used more for scientific research purposes. In an actual clinical setting, gynecologists and endocrinologists aren't very keen on these ways of distinguishing it. And actually, you know, even in people who've got lean PCOS, which is, so when you're living with a BMI that's below 24.9, as a nutritionist, you know, I'm very aware of the flaws of BMI as well. But if your BMI is in that so-called healthy range, you might be living in a smaller body, but you will be having, you can have many of the common symptoms of PCOS. And that was my experience, is that I was having all the symptoms of androgen excess, the inflammatory acne, the excess hair growth, all of these things that sometimes, that can also be an issue. So that affects about 20% of women with PCOS. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the different types, but in terms of having milder cases, absolutely. You know, it can be slightly more borderline, and certainly women with lean PCOS might find that their symptoms are somewhat milder, but it, you know, doesn't mean that they may not struggle with things like fertility and so on. And when they've done MRI scans of women who have lean PCOS, they've still found actually higher amounts of visceral fat. So that's the unhealthy fat that surrounds our organs, the type that we want less of. So yeah, there still can be a problem with insulin resistance and things like that. I also want to mention that irregular and absent periods doesn't automatically mean that you've got PCOS, and it can actually be a sign of other conditions. So things like, you know, a problem with even, this sounds very scary, but tumors or congenital adrenal hyperplasia. There's various issues like that, or even pregnancy, of course, if your periods have gone. So it's important to get a proper evaluation. There's also a condition called hypothalamic amenorrhea, where you may not be getting your periods because you're in a calorie deficit, and that can often happen to women who are athletes or overtraining. It's a condition called REDS, or women who are suffering with an eating disorder or disordered eating, or perhaps losing a lot of weight in a short period. So these are other conditions that are distinct to PCOS, but can also have irregular or absent periods.
And does PCOS always affect people's fertility, or can people have PCOS and be able to get pregnant without a problem?
So I'm so happy you asked that, Kate, because you know, I do find that when I'm talking about this, it's all such serious stuff when we're talking about PCOS. And I'm sure for everyone listening, you're hearing all these things about long-term risks and so on. But one of the positive things about PCOS is that there doesn't actually seem to be reduced fertility across the lifespan in women with PCOS. Most women with PCOS will go on to conceive and have and have a baby, but the journey might be longer. So we do know that 8 out of 10 women with PCOS do struggle to get pregnant. And so making changes early and addressing obviously the PCOS, the insulin resistance, and ensuring that, you are having periods, it's difficult to say ensuring, but, trying to optimize your lifestyle, you're perhaps seeking further help. And if when it comes to the outcome of having a baby, obviously things like the Fertility Network is doing is raising awareness of there's many different tools at hand. There's so many different tools in our toolkit as healthcare professionals to be able to provide that outcome, whether it's things like IUI or IVF, or, there's various opportunities now and options. Although I know that that's one of the things that women first remember when they're diagnosed with PCOS. They all remember the moment in the doctor's room where they're told it's going to be really hard to have children, or I've even had patients of mine who said they were told they're never going to have a baby, or they're never going to get pregnant, or perhaps that's what they also took away from the session. And it can be incredibly distressing and cause a lot of trauma. So I just want to emphasize that as well, that there is hope out there for sure.
What about you? I mean, we're talking about diagnosis, but how did you get diagnosed, and how was it for you to find out you had PCOS? Had you heard of it before?
Yeah, so I had a really unique situation in that I'm in this incredibly privileged position where my mother's actually a senior consultant obstetrician and gynecologist in the NHS. She's had almost 35 years experience, over 35 years experience in the NHS, treating thousands of women with PCOS, which is the main reason we wrote our book together. But I was at Oxford University, and it was in my last year when I started to get symptoms of PCOS. And I think before that, my lifestyle had been quite different. I'd been eating quite healthily at home. I was quite active with my dog. I noticed there was a big lifestyle shift when I went to uni, and there was also a huge amount of stress. I was doing finals and I developed severe cystic acne. I'm talking about the kind where I often wouldn't leave my bedroom for 2 days. I was losing chunks of hair from my head. I started to gain some weight. My periods also became irregular. And I honestly didn't know what was wrong. I was also getting a lot of facial hair growth and things that when you're 19, it's just the last thing you want. It was incredibly distressing. I've had a lot of time now and things like therapy and stuff to be able to process that. But at the time, I didn't know what was wrong with me. And it wasn't long after that my mother suggested it may be PCOS. But being 19, I obviously didn't want to listen to my mother. And it took, I really didn't know that much about PCOS. I didn't use the fact that my mum was in that amazing position to be able to pick her brain. And when I did look it up online, it said that you had to have excess body weight to have PCOS. So I thought, that doesn't sound like me, maybe it's something else. And over the years, I was on the pill, and I would try to come off the pill. And the pill is a great treatment for PCOS. Obviously, it's not relevant if you're trying to conceive, but in terms of managing the risk of womb cancer, which is higher if you're not having regular bleeds, and also for me, the really, really self-conscious, how self-conscious I felt having a lot of acne and hair growth, it was really, really hard. And I think that it was a really good treatment at the time, but obviously I wasn't really addressing some of the issues. And at the time, I would try to come off it, but the symptoms would sort of flare up, and I was never really able to get on top of it. It was only when I was able to make nutrition changes to my diet, how I was eating, how I was sleeping, how I was moving, how I was managing my stress. So even looking at the relationships in my life, could I set healthier boundaries? Could I spend less time on social media? Could I minimize my alcohol intake? These things made a huge difference. And I was able to get my blood sugars down to a healthy range. I was diagnosed when I found out I was pre-diabetic in my 20s when I was actually a nutrition student, and I was horrified because I was like, oh, I'm lean, I work out, I think I eat healthily, I'm literally studying nutrition, and I did a finger prick test and found out I was pre-diabetic. and my world kind of fell to the floor. My dad had type 2 diabetes. My whole family had type 2 diabetes and was on insulin. So I knew I had that risk factor. And we know PCOS is a genetic trait. We kind of call it the cousin of type 2 diabetes. But I kind of thought, okay, that's it. So I really started to pay more attention to those things, because even though I was studying nutrition, there were still areas where I hadn't looked at, and I wasn't looking at my stress management and those other things as well. So I did make shifts in that direction. And I found that I had huge relief from a lot of my symptoms. I found my anxiety waning. I found that my periods went from being irregular to having predictable cycles within 1 to 2 days. I found that my skin cleared up, my hair growth decreased, and my hair, was thick and healthy. And obviously it's a chronic condition. I never ever want to undermine that with PCOS, and everyone is different. And medications, there should be no medication shaming, which is why even in our book we talk about myth busting around the pill and stuff like that, because there can be a lot of conflicting information online. If you need medication or surgery, that's absolutely fine, and it's important that you get the right medical treatment, but it doesn't mean that lifestyle changes won't help you. Evidence-based lifestyle changes are always going to help you, whether or not you need medications or surgery. And this is true for every condition. It's, we all want to live a long and healthy life, and obviously minimize the long-term complications of PCOS as well. So that was sort of my story. Obviously, I'm still working on my PCOS in terms of managing all of these areas, and I'm a human being. I always say to my clients as well, it's progress, not perfection. If you hate fruits and vegetables, maybe start with adding one in every day because you find something that you like. Or if you hate going to the gym, like I'm not a huge gym person, so for me it's I go for walks, or I like doing YouTube video workouts in the privacy of my home when no one's around. So it's just finding what works for you and what fills your cup. I think that's really important with PCOS. And community. I think having a community like Fertility Network UK or other places where it can feel very isolating if you're going through fertility issues or you're going through PCOS, it feels like everyone around you, if you go on social media, has flawless skin or is popping out babies, and it can feel incredibly isolating. So I found, for me, finding a community was really important in managing my PCOS.
Was it your own experience that was one of the things that led you to be so interested in this as as your future job? Was it due to your own experience?
Absolutely. Honestly, Kate, so many people have asked me this, and if I had the personal experience of literally having my mother, who's a gynecologist, in right there, and I was seeing dietitians, I was seeing dermatologists, naturopaths, going on every supplement under the sun, seeing a personal trainer to try to help manage tone up and help with like my high glucose levels. I was going to all these different practitioners for different problems, and no one was actually joining the dots and telling me, okay, this is what you need to do. And I know that this is a case for so many of my clients. They're told, go away and lose weight. And that's so disempowering, because so many of them have been on various diets. They haven't been able to get the results they wanted. Many of them do struggle with disordered eating, which we know is common in PCOS. There's a much higher risk of disordered eating and eating disorders such as binge eating disorder as well. So I think my own experience is definitely the reason. My mum was writing a book in the pandemic. She's had a very busy surgical career, and she finally said, I'm going to write that women's health book I've always wanted to. And I said, you have to write this book on PCOS, because this is the book I wish I had 10 years ago, to be honest, 15 years ago. And it's the reason that we wrote it is because it's so underserved. The fact that 3 in 4 women are living with PCOS, not knowing they have it, they're perhaps finding out when they're on their fertility journey and they're not able to conceive, or they're finding out later on when they're diagnosed with diabetes. And I just don't think that's okay. I think we have to improve the conversation around what a regular menstrual cycle is, what PCOS is. It's not your fault if you get PCOS or you have PCOS. It's a complex condition, and you can literally, I had a lot of internalized shame. I was like, I'm a nutritionist, going and talking about this, but I realized the more we share, the more vulnerable we are. We realize how common this is. This is 10% of women in reproductive age who've got PCOS.
Do you think that lifestyle and nutrition can really genuinely make a difference? I mean, in your experience, has it made a difference?
transformed my life. And I actually want to really emphasize this, that nutrition and lifestyle is not woo-woo science. This is the official first line of treatment, first line of management for PCOS. And this is encoded in the national and international guidelines, in things like the ESHRE guidelines, the Monash guidelines. And in our book, we've got over 500 scientific references at the back, so that, you know, people can go and look up those journal articles themselves. And the reason for that is that there's often this idea that it has to be one or the other. You have often got wellness influencers saying, ditch the pill, ditch metformin, ditch, you know, don't have IVF and put all these drugs in and just do all these things. And guess what? That might work for some people, but if you have PCOS, you'll know how hard that can be. And then you have sometimes the healthcare professionals on the other side who are well-meaning as well. You know, everyone wants to help people ultimately, but they're also saying, oh, forget the lifestyle, forget the nutrition, just take this medication. They're not empowering the person in front of them to make little shifts. So I always say to people, you know, you don't have to go all or nothing. It's about making simple, sustainable shifts. So just like I mentioned, looking at these pillars of lifestyle and looking at how you can shift the needle. Maybe there's an area you need to pay a bit more attention to. We know that sleep can really worsen insulin resistance and therefore increase cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and worsen those symptoms of androgen excess. I definitely know if I've not slept well, I'm more likely to reach for the biscuit tin than I am for the fruit bowl. So making these changes, getting into bed slightly earlier, or listening to a really soothing, you know, guided meditation. These are the sorts of simple shifts that we can all do. And certainly if you're trying to conceive, making changes is going to help with that as well. We know that with regards to, I work with a lot of clients on optimizing their fertility and their diet and lifestyle around that. And we know that actually making changes as early as possible is beneficial, particularly so you go into that pregnancy with good levels of micronutrients and you're well nourished. You're not entering it after, not having looked at those factors. So I think we're doing a disservice to people by not looking at those factors, because that's actually the first line of treatment. On top of that, yes, some people will need medications and surgery or IVF or other things like that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I just want to put that message out there, and that's what we are all about. It will help with things like excess hair growth. There are simple lifestyle things you can do. There's actually science behind even having things like spearmint tea, which has been shown in some small studies to help reduce androgen levels. And that was actually a traditional cultural practice from Turkey, where women would have a few cups of spearmint tea. That's something that's simple. It costs pennies, and you know, you can add that in. And just knowing that, sure, you might need the laser treatments on top of it, but I would rather empower people rather than say, look, you've got PCOS, this is it, this is your lot, because I've been there. And I think that once we empower ourselves with education, with the science, with the knowledge, then we can be in the driving seat. We can decide how far we want to go with things and be in control.
Are there some foods that people should just completely avoid with PCOS, really?
So I think that's a super question, Kate. I get asked this all the time as a nutritionist. Okay, what's really bad for me? Is this really good for me? Is this really bad for me? And first thing I want to say is there are no good or bad foods. Whenever we think of things like that in this very binary way, it actually leads to quite a restrictive mindset rather than thinking about abundance and getting more nutrients in. So, and that can end up leading to things like binge eating or even restrictive dieting. And rather than doing that, I'd rather focus on foods that are really going to nourish you and how to bring those in. So yes, there are foods that are less beneficial for PCOS, and they're really two categories. One is the ultra processed foods. So these are the foods that really don't bear any resemblance to their original form. So things like biscuits, pastries, things like processed meats, things that come out of a package and that have a really, really long ingredients list, although not all processed foods are bad. So things like, canned beans and things like that are a really great way to eat healthily and that do have some processing, or things like tofu. Tofu is a minimally processed food, but is incredibly beneficial. I'm talking about the foods that often have a lot of added salt, oil, and sugar, a lot of emulsifiers, a lot of additives that disrupt the gut microbiome. And we actually know that women with PCOS have less beneficial and diverse gut bacteria. So we're more prone to things like IBS gas and bloating, constipation, diarrhea, these sorts of issues. So making these changes and trying to not, I wouldn't say eliminate, but reduce these foods in your diet can really help. You know, I'm definitely someone, if I go to a birthday, I'm going to have a slice of birthday cake. Is it something I have every day? No, I'd much rather have a big bowl of berries with maybe a few pieces of dark chocolate. That's going to be a lot more beneficial for me. Similarly with animal derived foods, so things like red meat, chicken, a lot of foods that are higher in saturated fat. And the reason why is that these foods worsen insulin resistance. They often increase inflammation, which we know is higher in PCOS. You can have higher levels of something called C-reactive protein. And these foods also lack fiber. Fiber is an incredibly protective macronutrient. So it actually helps improve our gut microbiome, so our gut bacteria, and it helps with blood sugar levels and satiety. It reduces our risk of long-term chronic conditions like type 2 diabetes. So reducing these foods, and it might feel overwhelming and you're thinking, gosh, I eat a lot of meat, where do I start? But actually thinking about where could I add in more plant protein instead? So swapping chicken for tofu and a stir fry, or swapping, processed salami for maybe some hummus instead in a sandwich. You know, just making these little shifts make a huge difference. So I always try to focus with my clients on what they can bring in. Sure, if they're drinking lots of fizzy drinks or eating a lot of having a lot of sugar sweetened beverages, a lot of alcohol, I do advise them to minimize that. And this advice is all the same in a fertility friendly diet as well. And we often know that a lot of full fat, a lot of dairy is often pushed in fertility spaces as well, and that's often quite high in, it is high in saturated fat. It's also high in mammalian estrogen, which can worsen things like inflammatory acne in some people. And certainly if you're a person of color, we know that you've got quite high likelihood that you've got lactose malabsorption. In fact, globally, 70% of the world is lactose intolerant, and in some communities like South Asia, which is I'm in, my heritage is Indian, it can be up to 90%. So, these are not foods that are going to bring you health, or they might be foods that you have on occasion, and perhaps you're going to have dinner somewhere really special, or this is just something you're going to have once in a while. But it's understanding which foods are going to improve your health, are going to improve your symptoms of PCOS as well. So the foods that I tell people to focus on are the minimally processed or unprocessed whole plant foods. So we're talking about fruit. Fruit gets a really bad rep. Fruit does not worsen insulin resistance. In fact, there are studies showing even up to 20 fruits a day can actually reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes. I'm not suggesting anyone has a fruitarian diet. I think, if I lived in Bali, I might try it or something, but I don't recommend these sorts of restrictive diets. I'm talking about getting a variety of different foods in. So fruit, vegetables, whole grains, we'll talk about carbohydrates, legumes. So these are beans, tofu, peas. These are all incredible foods to include. And then some nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, which are very antioxidant rich. And try and make water your beverage of choice. So I used to, be a big drinker, often binge drinking, and that was worsening my PCOS in my early 20s. And I then started to find different ways to socialize, and that actually curbed my anxiety as well. So rather than relying on alcohol as a pick-me-up, which we obviously really want to reduce the PCOS with, if we are trying to get pregnant. Similarly with caffeine as well, having a lot of caffeine can also be detrimental for fertility. So I go for things that are more uncaffeinated, herbal teas like red bush tea or spearmint tea, which can help with the androgen levels as well. And sparkling water with a slice of lemon always feels quite special. But these unprocessed plant foods are full of fiber, full of micronutrients like magnesium, which PCOS fighters can be a little less sufficient in. They're also really, really rich in antioxidants as well. So just getting all these anti-inflammatory foods in will really help as much as possible.
So it can almost be a bit about eating more of the right things rather than focusing on not eating things. Is that how you try to see it?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. So I have worked with so many people and they were told, cut out this, cut out that. And look, yes, I personally do follow a more whole food, plant-based way of eating. So I never think of it as a diet. I think of abundance. What can I bring in? Having things. I actually get a lot of my clients, they often say to me, I'm eating more than I did before, because I was always in this restrictive mindset. I was always trying to lose weight. And when you make weight your only goal, Kate, it's very disempowering, because when you focus only on weight, that's not very empowering. When you think of a long-term goal, like, I wish I had more energy, I wish I could go on this hike, okay, I want to have more energy, or I want to be able to be fit and healthy so I can have a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby, or yeah, whatever your goal is, don't make it only about weight, because that is just, you know, an aesthetic goal. It's often very short-lived, and it doesn't really often serve the best results. So rather than focusing on that number on a scale, focusing on another goal can be really helpful. And actually looking at, are you eating regularly? Are you eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Are you having breakfast? That can be so important for PCOS management. Eating in line with your circadian rhythms, or are you grazing throughout the day, constantly snacking because your blood sugar's a bit haywire? So looking at these things, and actually looking at the foundations, is what I advise people to do, rather than getting stuck in restrictive bad diets, which basically promote weight cycling, where your weight keeps going up and down, you keep gaining and losing weight, and that worsens things like your sleep, your androgen levels, your blood sugar levels, and it's a vicious cycle. Often, we call it yo-yo dieting, and it's really disastrous for women with PCOS. So yeah, looking at those aspects can really help.
We've got a quite interesting question about exercise from someone who says they've got PCOS and endometriosis, which means they often struggle with exercise due to the pain. And they're asking if you could suggest any types of exercise that might be particularly beneficial. And I think you sort of touched on that a bit earlier, didn't you, when you said not everyone has to, I think we imagine everyone has to go to the gym and do things really fiercely, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, no, completely. That's such a great question, because like I said, with PCOS, there's no one size fits all. Now, there is science, and we do have studies on PCOS, and that's what I care about. I care about being scientific. I care about being evidence-based. And you'll often see a lot of stuff online that's against high intensity interval training for PCOS, whereas we actually have studies showing it can be beneficial, but everyone is different. I have some people who feel great doing HIIT, other people who feel burnt out and exhausted and end up not moving their body for the rest of the week. That's counterproductive. So if you've got PCOS and endo, firstly, I want to say that I'm incredibly sorry that you're managing two such difficult chronic conditions. They are distinct conditions, but they both and they both require different sets of management. But definitely all the tips that I've suggested will be helpful for endo as well. One of the things in terms of movement is actually lower intensity exercise. So things like walking. Walking gets a really bad rep, but walking is amazing for our mental and physical health. It lowers our blood pressure. It boosts our mood, particularly if we do it in nature. So, go to a park. If you live in the countryside, that's even better, or go with a dog. So even just focusing on getting your steps in, and if that's helpful for you, you can try an activity tracker. If you've ever had a disordered relationship with movement or with food, then perhaps avoid tracking and just go out for a couple of hours, enjoy being in nature, listen to a good podcast. There's so many nice podcasts out there, or an audiobook. I think walking is a very, very important tool for everyone, especially because many of us have sedentary jobs like myself, where we sit down for long periods of the day. So actually breaking up your movement throughout the day. So I try and recommend postprandial exercise. So what that means is exercising after a meal. That helps reduce glucose excursion. So when you eat, your blood sugar does go up after you eat. That's natural when you ingest any form of carbohydrates. So a simple way to manage that is to go for a short 10-minute walk, or lift some weights for 10 minutes. I also think lower intensity, slower weighted workouts could help you if you've got PCOS and endo. So things like lifting weights that are at a slower pace. Don't go for those high intensity classes at the gym, but lifting weights that can really help with glucose disposal, with pain management, and obviously listen to your body. And then there are things like yoga and Pilates, which there have been studies on both of them. There's an amazing study on yoga showing that it really helps with the mind-body connection and helps reduce cortisol levels in PCOS. So cortisol is a stress hormone. So if you're listening and you're thinking, what could I do? This can actually help connect you to your body. Yoga's also been There's been lots of studies on yoga and fertility as well. So definitely try a yoga class, or there's lots of lovely, one of my favorite channels is Yoga with Adrienne, which is on YouTube and totally free of cost as well.
I would also say that we actually do have our special Fertility Network UK yoga. That's every Tuesday at 7:30. So if you want to join, that's completely free. You can always join. We've got another question. Would you recommend, and I don't know what this is, but I'm sure you will, would you recommend doing calorie deficit? The person says nutrition foods are usually higher in calories, so it's hard to be in deficit. Do you know about nutrition deficit?
Yeah, so calorie deficits are required for, any weight loss. And I want to first say, if this is triggering and you're watching this and you do have disordered eating, it might be a good idea to mute my answer for this. But if you are to get into a calorie deficit, you have to be burning more calories than you're consuming. So all weight loss does require a calorie deficit, whether it's keto, paleo, plant-based, whatever, it all requires a calorie deficit. Now, it depends. There's lots of different ways to lose weight, and you can lose weight doing a lot of unhealthy things, whether it's things that are actually actively detrimental to you, like snorting cocaine, which obviously I wouldn't recommend. That might result in weight loss. But as my mum always says, there's no point losing weight to fit into a skinnier casket. So when you're talking about nutrient dense foods, it is possible to lose weight whilst eating nutritious diet. In fact, that can help in a variety of ways. We know that eating more high fiber plant-based foods actually has there's a thermic effect. So these foods actually burn more calorie, result in more calorie burn after you've consumed them. So there's a net effect of that. They also keep you fuller for longer, so they keep you satiated, and often these foods are naturally more calorie light. So I'm talking about fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans. These are foods to include in abundance, and definitely working with a dietitian or a nutritionist could really help you, because it can feel very isolating otherwise. You might have tried lots of different things already and not know where to start. But I would suggest definitely eating lower down the food chain. So your fruit, your vegetables, all of these things are brilliant. Having something like porridge for breakfast that's actually going to stabilize your blood sugars, maybe with something like soya milk and lots of berries and some flaxseed. That's also great for hormonal health. And just ensuring you're actually eating at regular times. Are you getting enough fruit and veg in? So just focusing on getting, lots of different colors in, lots of fiber in. There's no reason why you can't include nutrient dense foods. There's a lot of diets that are advertised that rely on meal shakes or set meal plans, but we know that people eating predominantly plant-based diets or exclusively plant-based diets are one of the few groups that actually maintain a healthier body weight. And in PCOS, whilst there's no one diet that fits all in PCOS and that's recommended by all guidelines, we know that they recommend eating predominantly plant-based. So those are diets like the Mediterranean diet that's rich in these foods that I've mentioned that are anti-inflammatory. And we know that the ultra-processed foods and the animal foods will continue to fuel that insulin resistance and worsen that inflammation. So that's my advice for you. But if you are struggling and you're wondering how to get into a calorie deficit, working with a health professional should help. And your GP could also help signpost you to some people that could help with that.
Thanks. And we've got a few questions which are actually medical. And one of the things that I should probably have stressed at the beginning is that, we're not here this evening to answer medical questions. Those should really be addressed to your doctor. But we do have another question about supplements. Do you recommend that people take supplements, or should they not need them if they're eating a good diet?
Yeah, so I have a whole chapter just before the recipes. I've got over 30 of my recipes in this book as well, but we have a supplements chapter because I get so many questions about supplements. So there are different supplements, and my approach as a nutritionist is to focus on food first. We are in a cost of living crisis and supplements are incredibly expensive. So I always say to people, focus on the foundations of your diet first and your lifestyle. So if you're spending 30 quid on a supplement that's been billed as the next cure, you might be better off spending that on some fresh fruit and veg that's going to actually nourish you and give you far more important results. But there are supplements that are specifically beneficial in PCOS, which I'll quickly touch on. So vitamin D. Women with PCOS tend to be deficient in vitamin D, and when they've done studies on that, and vitamin D is actually a hormone. It's not a vitamin as such, and it's produced in our skin when it's exposed to the sun. But obviously, as we look outside right now, we're not getting that much of it at this time of the year, living in the northern latitudes. So you want to make sure that you're taking a vitamin D supplement, even in the winter, ideally, if you've got PCOS. In the winter, the UK government advises everyone takes 10 micrograms of vitamin D. I would recommend for anyone with PCOS, they do take higher doses, but remember that really high amounts of vitamin D can also be toxic to your liver. So please see a healthcare professional for that. We do give advice on amounts and things in our book, but that depends. And there's also that there are studies showing benefits for fertility as well in some studies. And then there are probably the hottest supplement for PCOS that gets talked about a lot is myo-inositol or inofolic acid. And that is something that generally is recommended more when you're trying to conceive, and a ratio of 40:1 of D-chiro-inositol to myo-inositol. I hope I've got that right, the ratio, but it's difficult. There's small studies coming out of it now, but there's not a definitive answer in most PCOS guidelines about this supplement because of the variety of supplements that are out there, often in different amounts. But it's part of the reasons that myo-inositol or inophilic acid works is by increasing increasing the availability, it's the same kind of mechanism as metformin, if I'm right. So it can help in terms of insulin sensitivity, and inositol is naturally found in certain foods like beans and things like that. So it is a naturally occurring substance, but it can be helpful for potentially improving ovulation rates. Again, there's no definitive answer on that. And then there are other supplements that can be helpful in PCOS as well, but I do this on a case-by-case basis. So things like magnesium, if you've got sleeping issues or you're highly, highly stressed. Magnesium is also found in things like beans and dark leafy greens and nuts like cashew nuts and hemp seeds and flax seeds and things like that. So getting lots of those in. A lot of women with PCOS do tend to have lower levels of certain micronutrients, which is so important for fertility, for immune health, things like zinc, magnesium, chromium. But I often say to people, just before you take a supplement, remember that supplements can also cause harm. So for example, taking really high levels of zinc can actually deplete you in copper. So then you take a copper supplement. So you just shouldn't take any old supplements without getting the right advice. Similarly with iron, taking really high levels of iron can also be problematic because iron is a pro-oxidant. So not something that you should just be taking. It can actually increase inflammation unless you know that you have a deficiency. Perhaps you've got, usually the main cause in women of reproductive age is very, very heavy periods. So you need to be screened for iron. You can have a test done to check your hemoglobin and your ferritin levels and things at the doctors. Again, I'm not giving medical advice, but I'm just suggesting you get screened before you take these supplements. And if you've been on the pill for a long time, there is evidence to show that it might be helpful to take a good quality multivitamin in following that. And if you're trying to conceive, obviously I should say this since it's the fertility network, the most important thing is folic acid, not taking ones that are not recommended on the label. So things like methylfolate and things like that, unless you've been actually recommended by your health professional to take that. The one that is actually shown to help is folic acid, and you need 400 micrograms. And some people, such as those living in larger bodies, may need higher amounts. Or if you've got something like celiac disease as well, you may need higher amounts of folic acid. But it's super important to prevent neural tube defects, spina bifida, and things. So you need to ideally take it 3 months before you start trying to conceive. But if you haven't been taking it until now, you can still start taking it. It's so important. It's actually most important in that early part of pregnancy as well. So these are the ones, and if you're following a plant-based diet or eating mostly plants, then you want to take B12. A lot of meat eaters can also be deficient in B12 because factory farmed animals are usually injected or supplemented with B12. So that is a supplement that's super cheap and easy to find. It's actually made by microorganisms in the soil, not by animals themselves. So, and fortified plant milks and other alternatives do have some B12, but they don't have enough. So it's always good to take a supplement on top of that. And those are the ones that I recommend. Another one that I will quickly mention is omega-3. So I recommend an algae-derived omega-3 fatty acid. And this can actually help reduce inflammation. And they've done various studies in PCOS. Again, the main focus should really be on including plant-based sources of omega-3 in your diet. And if you do eat oily fish, remember that also in pregnancy, you're not ideally you're supposed to have not more than 2 portions a week, and there is also concern over things like mercury and microplastics and things like that. So just eat this, if you are going to eat those, then yeah, eat lower down the food chain, so the smaller fish. But you can get those from plant-based sources, so things like flaxseed, walnuts, hemp seeds, those are fantastic sources. And on top of that, I do myself take an algae derived omega-3 DHA and EPA supplement, because it did really help with my acne, with inflammation, and there are actually specific benefits as well that are emerging around fertility as well.
There's just a question from someone actually following on from that, and I know we're slightly running out of time, but someone was asking if inofolic alpha or myo-inositol, so I'm probably pronouncing these wrong, whether they were helpful to treat PCOS, but also if your cycles are regular and you want to treat other symptoms. So are those just for regulating your cycles, or would they be helpful for other PCOS symptoms?
Some people have found that they help decrease cravings. Again, we need more studies, Kate. So there's no one size fits all, and you need to, if you want to go onto inofolic alpha, you need to talk to your GP or your gynecologist about it before you start taking a supplement, ideally. But a lot of people have found that that anecdotally, I've had clients who found that it decreased cravings for simple sugars and things like that, and has helped a little bit with even things like acne, but we don't have the hard science on this yet. But yeah, I think it's something that is worth exploring if you're on that fertility journey and you're trying different things.
One final question, which I will ask you because I think it's really important. Someone's asked, how do you get to see a dietitian? Is it something your GP has to refer you to, or is it better to access it privately to get someone who really understands PCOS? I mean, can you get a GP referral?
Yes, you can. Your BMI does, I think, need to be on the higher side for that, and there can be longer waiting times. Obviously, our NHS is incredibly burdened with chronic diseases and conditions, and so there can be quite long waiting times for these things. But there are lots of dietitians out there. There are nutritionists like myself, so I work more looking at holistically at your whole lifestyle. I work with clients one-to-one in my own practice, but it really depends on your budget, of course, because seeing someone privately is going to be more expensive. But there are programs and things. What I would recommend is actually going to see someone who has the right qualifications, who has an understanding of PCOS themselves, as that will obviously help them be more empathetic. They don't necessarily need to have the condition, but just having worked with people with PCOS, and maybe people going through fertility issues themselves. I think that's really important, but it really depends on your budget. You don't have to feel that you have to see a nutritionist or a dietitian. There's loads, and I know, Kate, you're going to pop them in the show notes, lots of resources, like my book, Living PCOS Free. So I've got a 21-day program in there, but also things like free podcasts. My mother, if you type in Dr Nitu Bajekal, my mum's name, you'll hear lots of podcasts on PCOS and lots of tips and things like that. So don't feel that you have to spend a fortune to get that information. There was also a question in the chat that I realized hadn't been picked up. It was about celiac disease and PCOS. Shall I quickly answer that as well, Kate? So there's actually we have Mythbusters throughout our book, and one of the Mythbusters is I need to avoid gluten because I've got PCOS, and I hear this all the time. And again, it's that focus on cutting things out. But when it comes to PCOS, there are no studies showing that people with PCOS women with PCOS have higher risk of celiac disease or gluten intolerance. Obviously, there is that higher risk of a higher incidence of things like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. So you might be having things like bloating and other things, but that might be due to different reasons than gluten. So I do want to say that first off, for anyone who doesn't actually have diagnosed celiac disease, if you suspect that you've got celiac disease or non-celiac gluten intolerance, the most important thing is to definitely get a blood test with your GP, and you do need to have been having gluten in your diet prior to having that blood test. And they can also do things where they actually go in and actually have a look to see if there's been any damage to your small intestine and things as well. But another thing is to keep a food diary. So a blood test is not going to show you that you've got non-celiac gluten intolerance, but if you're constantly finding that there are issues after consuming gluten-based products, you can swap these out for nutritious gluten-free products. What I want to really emphasize is in studies showing people who cut out gluten without a reason, there's actually a higher risk of type 2 diabetes, a higher risk of cardiovascular disease just from cutting out gluten, because gluten-based foods like whole wheat bread or pasta actually provide a lot of fiber in our diet. So if you're swapping them out for processed, ultra-processed, gluten-free products, that's not necessarily going to give you health. So I would advise you, if you're removing things like whole wheat pasta from your diet, go for a chickpea pasta or a lentil-based pasta, make sure it's gluten-free, and because those are higher in protein, micronutrients, and fiber. If you're cutting out bread, try and opt for still fiber-rich foods like potatoes or millet, quinoa, amaranth, buckwheat. These are all naturally gluten-free grains. Many people with gluten intolerance can still tolerate things like oats, so go for gluten-free oats. Some people with celiac disease can't tolerate that. And for the person who answered the question about celiac disease, as you know, there can be that higher risk of fertility issues if you've got celiac disease as well. You can definitely manage both if you've got PCOS and celiac disease. I would recommend including, as I've mentioned, lots of nutritious pseudo grains in your diet, like the quinoa, the amaranth, the buckwheat, gluten-free oats if you can tolerate that, starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes and normal potatoes. They get a really bad rep, but I recommend warm cooling and refrigerating them and eating them the next day. That lowers the glycemic load. So eating foods with a lower glycemic load helps with glucose levels as well, but make sure they're high fiber. So yeah, if you're having potatoes, have them with the skin on, but that's where 90% of the potassium is. Don't peel them, don't peel your veg, eat them with the skin on. And so it's completely possible if you've got celiac disease to manage that and have a really, really nutritious diet. Often the focus is on those ultra processed gluten-free foods, but there are 30,000 edible plant species, and there's a plethora to choose from. So if you are struggling with that, then I do have a free fact sheet, and if you email me, then I'm very happy to send that to you on tips if you have celiac disease and just things to include. And make sure that you're eating lots of tofu and soya as well, that they're really rich in calcium, and fortified plant milks as well. That soya has been shown to actually help with ovulatory infertility in PCOS. It helps with weight management and helps with cycle regulation. So please, I'm not talking about the ultra processed soya burgers. Those are fine for parties once in a while, but I'm talking about your tofu, your tempeh, your edamame beans. So definitely get that into your diet. But thank you so much, Kate. It's it's been a real pleasure, and I think we've got through quite a lot of questions there.
We have, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. That was absolutely fascinating, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else has too. I think we're going to have to get you back another time, because I can see we could go on asking you questions all night. That was really brilliant. Thank you so